Many clients are struggling and concerned about their immigration application. Employers are concerned that they may not get foreign workers here on time. Today's edition of ImmPulse will talk to you about what's really happening in Canadian immigration and strategies you can consider to have an effective solution going forward.
I'm Howard Greenberg.
Hi, I'm Noman Hameed.
Well, Noman, we have a fairly full ImmPulse published this week. We recommend that our listeners take a look to see some changes in programs and updates on provincial nominee programs and a handful of cases which are interesting. But today's discussion is not about the ImmPulse. It's about what's coming.
Right.
We know that an announcement is pending concerning a new temporary worker stream that's fashioned in some way around the H-1B program. But the details have not been announced and the numbers haven't been announced. And what makes it interesting is we have too many temporary residents now. So if we're opening a new stream, who's not coming? Any?
Well, look, H-1Bs, 70 to 80%, typically we know, are individuals who are representing the IT industry who come from India.
Right.
We know that Canada's Express Entry currently doesn't have on the category draws for STEM many of those same occupations, which seems that Canada's not looking currently to bring individuals in to apply for a PR. So one of the questions in industry is, of this whole pool of H-1Bs, what types of skills, specialty occupations would be most impactful for Canada? I don't personally think it's going to be, a high volume of IT workers. I think it's going to be something more specific than that meets industry requirements.
Another complication, Noman, to what you described is the discussion about commencing a comprehensive trade agreement with India.
Right.
And it doesn't mean a lot to people, but to immigration specialists, we understand that there's going to be a chapter called Trade and Services. And Trade and Services involves the free flow of workers across each other's borders. And typically, they include a professional list with a number of occupations on it, which basically are an entree to Canada. And without the necessary restrictions that would be in an LMIA process or even an intercompany transfer process. So we're looking at a potential H-1B stream, and then down the line, potentially Indian workers coming to Canada. It seems somewhat challenging as to how the Canadian government is going to juggle all these balls in the air.
Right. I mean, the closest thing that we remember, 2010,
Right.
there was a IT software pilot program.
Right.
Where the program eventually was closed because of fraud, because of the high volumes of individuals coming there. There's got to be some safeguards. The last thing I think the population would want to see is unguarded, derailed process of high volumes of workers coming in. And before you know it, the study permit concerns become an IT worker concern.
So we'll have to wait to see. The negotiations are just starting. There's a lot of sectors involved. These trade agreements typically take at least a year to 2 years. The last agreement failed.
Right.
But this prime minister is anxious to trade with India, so we think this one will be a success.
So let's turn on the positive side. If you're a company
Right.
and you're doing business in the U.S.,
Right.
doing business in Canada,
Right.
these are positive indicators that there might be pathways to bring in some amazing talent
Right.
where there really isn't in the U.S. when you're looking at the H-1B crisis that they're faced with.
Well, at the very least, if I was an Indian company or a Canadian employer seeking Indian workers, what an opportunity to get the right staff and the right, the key resources.
Right.
So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. That's in the distance, but coming fast. Let's also talk a little bit about the OINP programs. The quotas for the provinces are up.
Right.
Number of certificates issued are up. And why is that important?
Well, we know that there's generally challenges in other parts of the program in terms of bringing in the same workers that we've seen in the past.
Right.
PR levels down based on the last couple of years. And a lot of the allotment, 50,000 of the levels plan has been passed back to the provinces.
Right.
But I find the issue that we've seen with Ontario is they have legislation which allows them to cancel and suspend applications, and they've applied it. They've applied it with regard to trades workers who applied under Express Entry. They either were in the Federal Skilled Trades Program or CEC. They were then identified by the province as being in demand. And unfortunately, there's a concern. I think there are 2,900 cases and percentage of them, some say around 500, had integrity concerns. And when I read the section with you earlier, Section 7 had 19 different ways that the province could cancel or suspend applications. They seem to raise the issue of integrity, but it could be things such as the housing challenges, labor market, wage issues. It's a very wide parameter. So those applications that were pending with the province have been sent back. Fees have been returned. Is this the precursor to what Bill C-12 might look like?
Well, C-12 doesn't have as comprehensive a provision. It just says suspend or cancel. And we know that the minister has gone on record to talk about the need for some fairly serious events to occur in order for that power to be used. Right. So it doesn't look like the tools are going to be as focused on immigrants federally as they are provincially.
Although let me run the scenario by, give me your opinion. So in this case, they said it was a concern about fraud and integrity.
Right.
And we know a lot of analysis around C-12 is focused on the SUV program being potentially a target.
Right.
And there have been concerns raised about some level of integrity with designated entities and certain applicants and consulting bodies that might be fabricating information. That's been floating around. Do you think, although I heard the minister talk about issues like it's around cybersecurity, but could it be, just like we see in Ontario, where they say there's enough concern in terms of fraud and integrity that part of the pool is polluted, so a section of it should be sent back?
Well, look, there seems to be consensus that the government will have the power to retroactively to cancel. But when they use rationales like fraud, it's going to take more of an in-depth analysis to sustain that basis, to put that forward in an intelligible way. The court proceedings will be enormous on this area, potentially tens of thousands of applications. And so we think that the federal government would proceed cautiously in using C-12.
So we'll have to watch how this comes into play, if it comes into play, and is it sustainable or defensible?
You've used the example of the SUV program. If you can't use C-12 to harness the number, impact the number of SUVs, what do you think the remedies would be? I mean, what are the options?
Well, I think this is a time when you're dealing with clients, first of all, to anticipate where the areas where the SUV program might be more vulnerable. And these are entrepreneurs, in many cases, who are in Canada. And we know that there are new opportunities. We know there's a TR to PR program, hasn't been well defined.
Right.
But some of the measures are people who are working in Canada, paying taxes, supporting the economy. So perhaps there's an opportunity there to put your hat in the ring, so to speak, in terms of an express entry profile. Interesting opportunities right across Canada provincially. So you might want to start thinking about plan Bs as well, to see where this goes.
So the issue with SUV is interesting because there's two aspects to it. One of them is the backlog, and one of them is what's the future going to look like.
Right.
And with respect to the backlog, our sense is that probably the department would reach out to all these individuals in the backlog and let them know how long they're going to have to remain in processing, probably with a view to allowing them to withdraw from the program. And that's probably the most basic step that they're going to take. You can anticipate that to occur rather shortly. But beyond that, they're going to have to have a more rigorous vetting system to move through the backlog quicker, to decide what part of that backlog should be processed and what part of that backlog shouldn't be. And it might be an integrity issue, which you raise, or it might be the contribution issue. Which one of them have a venture capital designated entity behind them, and which one of them have been in the program without funding from a third party?
We'll have to wait and see, but as we've noticed in our office, there's still applications being approved even under the incubator stream. So tough to say where that's going to land.
Much to our surprise.
Right.
Okay. So we didn't talk about the future SUV, and that could go a couple different ways. They don't need C-12 to limit designated entities to a smaller number than 10 a year, or just make it zero.
And we know that by January 1st,
right,
if nothing is changed, it resets against the numbers. But I would think there's a reasonable chance we'll see a lower number.
And a lower number of designated entities.
Could be, to your earlier point, is it that there's preference going forward only for priority
Right.
versus non-priority? Is it investment, non-investment? There should be some carving out, I would think, in terms of going forward. We only have 500 spots a year, so they'll have to narrow that pool, I would think.
So that's an interesting, on the sidelines, that's all imminent. That's going to
Mhm.
happen soon. Okay. We've talked a little bit about provincial nominee programs. They are a wonderful alternative to the federal program, and applicants or prospective applicants are well advised to speak to their advisors about how they best fit into a particular provincial program. If they find the right program, they can make it to Canada relatively quickly.
Right. Changes are coming too, so I think we're going to have to monitor each province. There's a lot of discussions about different types of programs that might be more sensitive to their regional needs.
I would mention that individuals wanting to go into provincial programs which are entrepreneur-based as opposed to skills-based should make sure that they're not creating fanciful business plans. The provinces are getting much smarter at this. It's pretty hard to get through an assessment process with a plan that makes no sense.
Right.
That was entirely costly and unwarranted. The last thing I want to talk about was work permits, because we see a fair amount of work permit applications, particularly under the SUV program, and the fairness letters that are coming out by the officers and the refusals are focusing not just on the basics, how much you're bringing to Canada, how much you're investing in Canada, how much you have for your own purposes. The letters have kind of elaborated into inquiries about where did you get the money. It doesn't have a regulatory support. It doesn't even have a policy support. But officers are asking some hard questions about, how legitimate the transfer of funds are and whether or not the individual really has all he or she says they have. And so it caused us in our office to look at all the possibilities that an officer might inquire about, looking at the case law.
Right.
And the predisposition of the courts, and start creating a more comprehensive explanation as to what the worker is going to do in Canada and when. In fact, we're now embarking on an analysis that in the first month the worker will do this, in the second month they'll do that, and giving them a kind of timetable or a roadmap, because we want an officer to understand the legitimacy of the need to have the individual in Canada and what their efforts will produce.
You really do need to step back and think about the entire business proposition.
Right.
We've seen circumstances where the officer was confused. They're looking at the individual's financial ability in isolation, not appreciating that there was cumulative capital of a broader group. So you have to talk about the entire investment and make sure it's clear for the officer.
So what we would normally do in 2 or 3 pages, we're now doing in 6 or 8 pages. Why? Because we know the officer is going to leave the roadway, so to speak, and inquire into all the aspects of coming to Canada in terms of their legitimacy, including the significant benefits that these contributions by the individual will make in Canada. And so it's not even just about money anymore. It's not even just about what the plan is anymore, but what is the impact going to be of having somebody in Canada on a work permit,
Right.
as opposed to staying home until the visa is ready and working on it from your home country, which is also the subject of criticism, because if you didn't come to Canada, how are you going to get your business off the ground?
Right.
So you really have to think through a strategy on the work permits to succeed.
Well, and on that note, we've seen a lot of pushback on the significant economic benefit.
Right.
And I think the point you're making is you can't have a couple paragraphs in a 80-page business
Right.
plan. You have to bring these sensitive issues up front. You have to speak to them. It has to have compelling information, be referenced, because officers don't have the time to go through every page. You got to bring it to their attention.
Right. That's exactly the point. That you're going to have to explain to the officer what the officer should have already asked you. You're going to have to anticipate and build it in, or the work permits are not going to be issued.
Yeah.
Look, this is a time when there's a lot of questions and there's uncertainty about what is a winning application and what's a winning strategy. Please feel free to reach out. We would be pleased to speak with you. Another complication coming, which is not being discussed yet, Prime Minister Harney has agreed.
Is that also related to Prime Minister Carney? You said Prime Minister Harney. Was he related to Barney?
And his brother, Tim Carney. Another added complication to what you've described is Prime Minister